Hi, all. This time we'll be talking about the crime of genocide. It's a rather heavy topic, um, but I think we are capable of doing it. And this obviously directly relates to our conversation on the ICC as well. So we will be talking about what exactly genocide is, how it's defined, what and some of the preconditions of genocide. Then we will do our discussion problem. So, genocide is actually a very, very old crime, um, and we find anthropological evidence of genocide in very old eras. However, genocide took on a increased efficiency, and our capacity for genocide took a greater capacity in the Industrial Revolution. So this is why the Nazi genocide, the largest in the modern era, was so utterly devastating and utterly efficient, is because they used the techniques of industrialization and of bureaucracy that Max Weber laid out in his work. World War II really set the example for what genocide was in the modern era. The official definition by the United Nations is that genocide is the intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group. It doesn't exactly say what that entails, that we'll look at here. It is not just mass execution, which the Nazis did, but it can also involve systematic rape or forcible transfer of children or other individuals. It is about destroying the people, if not necessarily individuals. It is about destroying the identity of the people, of taking the people out of the land that they considered home. In our country, what we did to Native Americans in many ways was genocide. By modern standards, it absolutely is genocide, and the only reason it is not called as such is because when it was happening at its height, we simply didn't have a word for genocide, and when I say we, our nation, ruled by Anglo-Saxons, did not consider it genocide. We did not consider it a bad thing. We were taking what was effectively ours to be had, right? That's how it was seen. The example is the Indian. One example of the said Native American genocide was the Indian boarding schools. There were other examples, more gruesome, but the Indian boarding schools do provide an example of how one could try to commit genocide without actually killing people. It was called, the slogan of many of these schools, one school in specific, was "Kill the man, Indian, save the man." So we see an example in our lower right-hand corner. That's the same individual. That is the same guy that was forced to be inside, thus lightened his skin color, cut his hair, changed his clothes, and they acculturated him to American type, European type culture. Children were taken from their parents, and white culture was imposed on them. The English language was imposed on them. They were not allowed to practice their language, their culture, and thus it had the result of killing people, but not killing people, but instead killing the culture. Is it as bad as what the Nazis did? No, but was it just as efficient in destroying a culture? Sure it was. As a crime, genocide is different than most other things we consider crime because it involves masses of people. It involves many, 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 many people. Even a serial killer doesn't even come close to doing what could be considered genocide. And within these situations, as I mentioned in our discussion of the ICC, It's very difficult to determine who is innocent and who's not innocent. When you have massive bureaucracies dedicated to giving people serial numbers and tattooing those serial numbers on the people's arms, who is guilty and who isn't? Is the tattoo person, is that person guilty of genocide? Is the person that mixed the chemicals to the ink guilty of genocide? Is the person that typed in the serial numbers of the people's arms into a database, is that person guilty of genocide? If those people aren't guilty of genocide, is the soldier that actually shot somebody but was ordered to shoot somebody, is he guilty of genocide? If that person's not guilty, then is his officer that made the decision even guilty? It's a very thorny issue, and we see similar issues with issues of white collar crime and government corruption. Whenever there are institutions that are doing things and making decisions and not just people, we find issues as to pinning blame. So genocide is interesting to us not just in when it happens, but we are very interested in trying to predict when it happens so we can prevent it, right? So genocide is not an absolute kind of thing. It's not like the weather. We can't absolutely predict it in being able to tell when it is or isn't going to happen, but there are certainly factors that can contribute to it or lead up to it. Individual factors, so who are the types of people who would, on the micro level, contribute to genocide happening? Perpetrators are typically, quote unquote, normal. They're everyday people, and we certainly saw this in the Nazi genocide. They are overwhelmingly male individuals. That may or may not have to do with patriarchy established not only in our society but previous societies. So, for example, in the 1940s in Germany, most of the people in the workplace were male. If a genocide were to happen in the United States now, it might not be overwhelmingly male. That's a little bit fishy. Other preconditions of genocide, you want to look at the work of Stanley Milgram. You're probably familiar with the Milgram experiment. You could go to YouTube quite easily and learn a little bit more about Milgram. But to put very shortly, Milgram conducted a number of obedience tests in which he was interested in why people would just simply follow orders that could hurt another human being. And he found that many people are capable of just following orders simply because they're told to follow orders. He also found that there are some people that don't just follow orders, but he definitely documented the phenomena. So let's talk about some societal factors. The more diverse a society is, the society is both more and less prone to genocide. So a diverse society in which the power is dominated by just one group is more prone to commit genocide. So, and the example of Nazi Germany fits. The people in power were white German nationals, people that identified as being German first and foremost. They were overwhelmingly Christian or at least not Jewish. And Jews didn't have much say in government during that time. So because those people didn't have say, laws could be passed, people could move into power that would attempt to kill them. Similarly, a diverse society in which power is equally distributed is less prone to genocide. So, if there are people in power who are of that given nationality, then they can say, hey, wait a minute, we can't kill my people, right? They can say, or they at least have arguments. There's a say. They have positions of power. People see who they are. And that's the difference between the diverse society that one group dominates other groups, and the diverse society that's what's called pluralistic, which here's a definition that I didn't write out. Pluralism is the state of many groups having say in government. Preconditions on more societal factors include dehumanization. So society learns to see certain groups as not being human. We have some rather ghastly examples here. The two on the extreme right and the extreme left-hand sides. The extreme right-hand side is a propaganda depiction of a Jewish person from Nazi Germany. We see this ugly, frightening-looking man. That was the state depiction of what a Jew looked like. On the extreme left-hand side, we see and I understand you don't probably read German. That is making an argument. Obviously, it's not depicting a Jewish person. It is depicting what looks to us to be an ape. The racism of the era they would put together that is a racist depiction of a person of African descent, and effectively the message being conveyed by the poster is music made by blacks is it's a tool of the Jews, as signified by the Star of David being worn by said black person. Again, these are really ugly things. Then in the middle, though, this is not just something we have in our world. We have in the past. In the middle, we see two panels in black and white. You see a more faint Star of David attached to a maggot that is eating the world, saying that Jewish people are like a worm or vermin and consuming the world. That was from the World War II era. But then the other depiction, and this is disturbing to say the least, is from the early 2000s. It was a cartoon of a Arab man, a racist depiction of an Arab man spreading the rot associated with this racist depiction to the rest of the world, thus implying that Arabs are vermin that will eat the whole world too. So this is in all likelihood, anti-Muslim propaganda from the early 2000s. So this is not things of the ancient past. These things still happen today, and they're very disturbing. I think most of us can agree we don't want this kind of stuff, but it exists. Similar dehumanization. During the Nazi genocide, it was common to refer to Jews as rats. If you know anything about the Rwanda genocide that occurred in the nation of Rwanda within Africa, it was common to refer to the Tutsis, the discriminated against roots, as cockroaches. And the propaganda would talk about you have to kill the Tutsis just as you would kill cockroaches. State factors. The state is often the mechanism for societal desires for genocide. Genocide cannot occur without the structure of the state, as we see with, and it's understandable when we talk about Weberian theories of bureaucracy. We need in the modern world bureaucracy to do things in mass, and if we have a state bureaucracy bent on killing a lot of people, it's capable of doing such. So we would need those communication factors, we would need the military, we would need transportation, we would need all kinds of things necessary to do such a grotesque task in mass. Other preconditions of genocide, not just the existence of the state, but certain qualities have to exist within the state. So, upheaval. The state usually isn't in a great condition when genocide occurs. There is often either a civil war or government change, a regime change. Can be the precursor to genocide. Additionally, scarce resources can also be the precursor to genocide. So if a society is deciding who should eat and who shouldn't, or who should have water or who shouldn't, this can lead to genocide. Another factor to keep in mind is that genocide tends not to occur in democracies. So that is a safe hold we have in our country, at least at the moment, is that when people have say in government, usually there are at least some people that says we shouldn't kill off all those people. And that's a very good thing. But it is important to keep in mind that from the early 1900s to 1933, Germany was a democracy known as the Weimar Republic. And Adolf Hitler took control through partially democratic means. So dictators can and dictatorships can come out of democracies. So that is something we need to keep in mind to never fall victim to a dictatorship in our own country. And of course, there are international factors as well that can be preconditions to democracy. It's thought in modern world systems theory that interconnectivity may reduce risk of genocide. So because everyone all over the world knows what's happening all the time, it may appear to us that the world's falling apart, but in reality, we are simply observing the problems in the world. So we know when a genocide is happening. If a genocide were happening in China, even though that government is relatively strict in terms of censorship, we would probably know if it was happening in mass. However, when the Nazi genocide was happening in full force, the average American didn't know much about that, and they didn't get many details until after the war. The 2005 World Summit stated that states have the responsibility to protect citizens. So this is an international statute that basically says the signers of that summit said states should protect their citizens. That may sound obvious to us, but other countries might disagree with that. And then the International Criminal Court, that was our other presentation for this week, spoke a bit about what could, the existence of the International Criminal Court may prevent genocide in the future, which is a good thing. Now let's talk about our discussion prompt. So this week I want you to talk about, as Americans, most of us tend to think of genocide as something that happens in other parts of the world. However, by modern standards, our treatment of Native Americans during the 1800s was a genocide. It was absolutely a genocide by modern standards, even though it wasn't called that at the time. So what I want you to write about is, do you think that the genocide would ever occur in the United States again? Or why not? So if so, what groups do you think would be most prone to being the victims of genocide and why? And if you don't think that that could happen in the United States, what makes us different in the modern era that makes us immune to genocide, or at least less prone to genocide? Okay, so that is it for this presentation. As always, if you have any questions, please contact me, and I will talk to you soon.